DNA test results don't lie, or do they? The internet is in complete chaos as Jim Jones has just made an unexpected demand that no one saw coming. After publicly celebrating what seemed like one of the biggest moments of his life, Jim is now questioning everything. Yes, you heard that right. Jim Jones is demanding another DNA test for Chrissy Lampkin's baby. This shocking twist has sent fans into a frenzy, sparking intense speculation about what's really going on behind the scenes. Was the first test inconclusive? Did someone plant a seed of doubt in Jim's mind? Or is there a deeper secret that's just now beginning to unravel? Social media is buzzing with wild theories, and insiders close to the couple are hinting that Jim's decision isn't just about science. It's about trust, betrayal, and years of unresolved issues finally coming to the surface. But here's the real question. What made Jim suddenly second-guess everything? Just when everyone thought this was a happily ever after moment, the rug has been pulled out from under them. And the most chilling part, Chrissy's reaction. Stay with us as we break down every jaw-dropping detail of this DNA bombshell, because things are about to get messy. Jim Jones never expected his world to turn upside down like this. Just days ago, he was celebrating what should have been one of the most defining moments of his life, a baby, a new chapter. A future that for years had seemed uncertain with Chrissy Lampkin, the woman he had been with for over a decade. Fans had always speculated about whether they would ever settle down, whether their love would ever lead to marriage, and whether they would ever start a family. And when the news broke that Chrissy was pregnant, it seemed like those questions had finally been answered. But behind closed doors, something darker was brewing, something that no one, not Jim, not Chrissy, not even their closest friends, could have predicted. At first, everything was perfect. Jim had posted a heartfelt message online, celebrating the blessing that was about to enter his life. He spoke about how excited he was to be a father, how he had never thought this moment would come, but now that it had, he was ready to give his child everything. Fans flooded the comments with congratulations, the blogs picked up the story, and for a brief moment, Jim allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally falling into place. But then came the message. It wasn't from a stranger. It wasn't from a hater. It was from someone Jim trusted, someone who had no reason to lie. And it was just one line. You might want to check that DNA. Bro. Jim stared at his phone, his heart pounding. At first, he laughed it off. It was ridiculous. He and Chrissy had been together for years. She had never given him a reason to doubt her. So why now? Why would someone even say something like this? He almost deleted the message without replying, but something stopped him. A feeling, a whisper in the back of his mind, telling him that maybe, just maybe, there was something to this. The next few days were a blur. Jim tried to act normal, but his mind wouldn't let go of that message. He started noticing things he had ignored before. Chrissy had been acting different lately. At first, he had chalked it up to pregnancy hormones, to stress, to the natural changes that come with bringing a life into the world. But now, in hindsight, it felt like something more. She had been avoiding certain topics. Anytime Jim tried to bring up details about the pregnancy, about dates, about doctor's visits, she would change the subject or give vague answers. He hadn't thought much of it before, but now it felt like she was hiding something. And then came the moment that changed everything. They were at a small gathering, just close friends and family, celebrating the baby news in an intimate setting. The energy was light. Everyone was drinking, laughing, reminiscing. And then, out of nowhere, Chrissy said something that didn't sit right with Jim. She mentioned a doctor's appointment that Jim knew for a fact had never happened. He froze for a second, his mind racing. Maybe he misheard. Maybe she just got the dates wrong. He decided to ask casually, just to clarify. When was that again? Chrissy hesitated. Jim caught the look in her eyes, a flash of panic, quickly replaced by a forced smile. You don't remember? She laughed nervously. Babe, you're so forgetful sometimes. The room went quiet. Something about the way she said it, something about the way she avoided his eyes, made Jim's stomach turn. And then, just as quickly as the moment came, it passed. The conversation moved on. But Jim couldn't shake the feeling. That night, as they lay in bed, he kept replaying the moment in his head. Something wasn't right. The next morning, he made a decision. He needed to know the truth. At breakfast, Jim brought it up. Chrissy, I want to do a DNA test. The air in the room shifted. Chrissy, who had been sipping her coffee, slowly set her cup down. Her expression was unreadable. What? She asked, her voice eerily calm. I need to be sure, Jim said carefully. It's nothing against you. Chrissy cut him off. You don't trust me. Jim sighed. It's not that, no, she snapped. That's exactly what it is. After all these years, after everything, you think I'd lie to you about something like this? Jim didn't answer, because deep down, he didn't know what to believe anymore. Chrissy pushed her chair back, standing up so fast that the coffee nearly spilled. If you really think I'd do something like that, then maybe we shouldn't even be having this baby together. And just like that, she walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Jim sat there, staring at his untouched plate of food. His hands were shaking. This was supposed to be one of the happiest times of his life. Why did it feel like everything was falling apart? Days passed, and Chrissy barely spoke to him. She was furious. Every time Jim tried to bring it up, she either ignored him or snapped at him. It was getting worse. The tension was unbearable. And then, out of nowhere, Chrissy changed her mind. Fine, she said one night. You want a DNA test? Let's do it. But when this comes back proving you're the father, I don't want to hear another word about it. Jim agreed. The test was done. The wait felt like an eternity. Jim didn't know what he was expecting, but when the results finally came back, his world stopped, because something wasn't adding up. Jim stared at the paper in front of him, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. The results didn't say what he expected. They didn't confirm what he thought was the truth. They weren't an outright denial, but there was something off. Something was wrong. He looked up at Chrissy, who was sitting across from him, her arms crossed. What does it say? She asked, her voice cold. Jim's mouth was dry. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Chrissy grabbed the paper from his hands, scanning it quickly. And, for the briefest second, Jim saw something in her expression. A flicker of something, fear, guilt. It was gone just as quickly as it appeared, but Jim saw it. He knew what he saw, and now he needed answers. Because if this baby was his, why didn't the test confirm it? And if it wasn't, then who was the father? Jim's hands clenched into fists. He wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. Jim Jones couldn't breathe. His hands gripped the edge of the table as he tried to process what he was looking at. The DNA test was right in front of him, clear as day, but it wasn't giving him the straight answer he needed. It didn't confirm he was the father. It didn't completely deny it either. There was something strange about the results, something that made his stomach twist in knots. Chrissy sat across from him, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. For a brief second, when she first saw the results, Jim had caught it, that flicker of something in her expression. Fear, guilt, he wasn't sure. But now she had composed herself again, acting as if everything was fine, as if this wasn't the most important moment of their entire relationship. I don't get it, Jim finally said, his voice low, shaky. What does this even mean? Chrissy scoffed, shaking her head. It means nothing. It means you wasted your time and money on something pointless. Jim's eyes narrowed. Pointless. Yes, she snapped. Because I told you from the beginning, Jim. There was never anything to doubt. And now you see. The test isn't saying you're not the father, is it? Jim hesitated. She was right about that. The results weren't a direct no, but something was still off. But it's not a yes either, he shot back. Look at this part. He pointed to a section of the paper that mentioned inconclusive results. It didn't fully exclude him, but it also suggested that something about the genetic markers wasn't lining up. Chrissy rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Jim, you don't even understand how these things work. DNA tests aren't always 100% clear-cut. Maybe they just need another sample. Jim stared at her, his heart pounding. She was talking fast, too fast. Like she was trying to dismiss this and move on before he had time to think. I don't know, he murmured, shaking his head. Something ain't right. Chrissy threw her hands in the air. Oh, for God's sake, Jim. What do you want? Another test? Fine. Do another one. But this is the last time. Because after this, I don't want to hear another word about it. Jim didn't answer. He just kept staring at the paper. Chrissy huffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the room. Jim didn't chase after her. He couldn't. He was too busy thinking. His gut was telling him something he had been trying to ignore for weeks now. But this was the final straw. Something wasn't adding up. And he was going to find out what. The next morning, Jim wasted no time. He set up an appointment for another test, this time at a different lab. He wasn't taking any chances. But as he was making the arrangements, something unexpected happened. His phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. Hello. A deep breath on the other end. Then a voice he never expected. Jim, we need to talk. It was a woman's voice, familiar but distant. And then, before he could even react, she dropped a bombshell. I know what Chrissy's hiding. Jim's blood ran cold. He stepped away from the counter, his mind racing. Who is this? The woman sighed. That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you're not crazy. You're not paranoid. And you're definitely not overreacting. Jim's grip tightened on the phone. What are you saying? I'm saying, the woman continued, her voice serious, that Chrissy hasn't been honest with you. And if you really want the truth, you need to start asking the right people. Jim's jaw clenched. He wanted to demand more answers, but before he could, the line went dead. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it as if it held the key to everything. His pulse was racing. Who was that? And how did she know what was going on? For a moment, he considered calling Chrissy and demanding answers. But no, not yet. First, he needed to find out exactly what was going on behind his back. And he knew exactly where to start. Jim spent the next few hours making calls, digging through his contacts, trying to piece together any information he could. He reached out to old friends, people who might have seen or heard something. At first, nothing seemed to come up. But then something strange happened. One of his boys, someone who had always been in the mix, always had his ear to the streets, called him back. Yo, Jim, the guy said cautiously. I don't know if this means anything, but you remember that dude Chrissy used to be cool with? The one from way back? Jim's heart nearly stopped. What dude? There was a long pause. I don't know, man. Just some guy she used to hang with before y'all got serious. I saw them together a few months back. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now, I don't know, bro. Something felt off. Jim's head started spinning. A few months back? That was around the same time Chrissy would have gotten pregnant. His stomach turned. He had to see her. Now, Jim jumped in his car, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. His mind was racing the whole drive. What if it was true? What if Chrissy had been lying to him this entire time? By the time he pulled up to their house, he barely even turned off the ignition before he was out of the car. He stormed through the front door, slamming it behind him. See it here, ISSY. She appeared from the hallway, her eyes widening. What the hell is wrong with you? Jim held up his phone, shaking with anger. Who's the guy? Chrissy froze. For the first time, he saw real panic in her eyes. What guy? She asked, but her voice was too high, too forced. Jim stepped forward. Don't play dumb. Who's the guy you were hanging out with a few months ago? The one people saw you with. Chrissy opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since this whole thing started, she had no quick answer. Jim felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Oh my God, he whispered. Chrissy's eyes darted around, as if looking for an escape. Jim, I can explain. He shook his head. I don't need an explanation. I need the truth. Chrissy swallowed hard. I never wanted to hurt you. Jim's hands clenched into fists. Is the baby mine? Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't know. Jim felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Everything stopped. Everything shattered. He turned away, running a hand over his face. I can't believe this. Chrissy stepped forward, reaching for him, but he backed away. Jim, please, she begged. It's not what you think. But Jim wasn't listening anymore. Because now, everything made sense. The weird behavior. The lies. The hesitation over the DNA test. She had known. She had always known. And now, Jim Jones had to figure out what to do with the truth. Jim stood frozen in the middle of the room, his entire world collapsing around him. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had built his life with, was now looking at him with tear-filled eyes, admitting the one thing he never thought he'd hear. I don't know, Chrissy had whispered, her voice barely audible. Jim could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had prepared himself for a fight, for denial, for anger, but not this, not a confession. You don't know? Jim repeated, his voice eerily calm. What the hell does that mean, Chrissy? She wiped at her eyes, shaking her head as if trying to find the right words. Jim, I didn't think it was possible. Okay, I swear to you, I never meant to lie. I just lie. Jim's voice erupted, filling the room with his fury. Chrissy, you let me believe this was my child. You sat there while I took that damn test, while I questioned myself, while I felt crazy, when all this time you knew? Chrissy flinched at the venom in his voice. I didn't know for sure. She shot back, her own frustration rising. Jim, I thought it was yours. I swear to you, I did. But then, when you started pushing for the DNA test, I got scared. Jim clenched his jaw, his mind spinning. Every interaction, every moment in the past few months suddenly took on a new meaning. The way Chrissy had dodged his questions, the way she had dismissed his doubts, it was all because she had been afraid of what the truth might be. He felt sick. Who is he? Jim finally asked, his voice cold. Chrissy hesitated. Who? It is he. She exhaled shakily, looking anywhere but at him. It was a mistake. A one-time thing. We were going through a rough patch. Jim, you were always busy with work. I was feeling alone, and I don't care about your ex-CUSES. Jim roared, slamming his fist against the table. I asked you a damn question, Chrissy. Who is he? Chrissy's lip quivered. She hesitated a second too long. And that's when Jim knew. His stomach twisted with rage as a name came to mind. The guy. The one his boy had mentioned. The one she used to be cool with. No, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Chrissy stayed silent. Jim's entire body went rigid. It's Kim, isn't it? That dude from back in the day? The one people saw you with? Tears slid down Chrissy's face as she nodded slowly. I'm so sorry, Jim. Jim let out a bitter laugh. You're sorry? He could barely breathe. Everything around him felt unreal, like a scene from some twisted nightmare he couldn't wake up from. For months, he had been questioning himself. For months, he had been fighting his own instincts, convincing himself he was just being paranoid. And the whole time, he had been right. Jim turned away, running a hand over his face, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside him. But it was no use. He was drowning in them. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage. I need to get out of here, he muttered under his breath. Jim, please, Chrissy begged, stepping closer. We can work through this. I love you. I love you so much. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake, but I don't want to lose you. Jim turned to her, his eyes blazing. You already lost me, Chrissy. Her face crumpled at his words. He grabbed his phone, his keys, and without another word, he stormed out of the house. The moment the door slammed behind him, he felt like he could finally breathe again. But the air was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get the hell away from Chrissy. His phone buzzed in his hand. A text, unknown number. I told you she was hiding something. Now, what are you going to do about it? Jim's grip tightened around his phone. Who the hell was this person? And how did they know so much about his situation? He didn't have time to figure it out right now. He had bigger problems. Jim drove for what felt like hours, his mind racing, replaying everything over and over again. By the time he finally pulled over, he was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. He sat there in silence, gripping the wheel, his jaw clenched. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, Jim did exactly what he had promised. He took another DNA test, this time at a private lab with no chance of interference. He needed the truth once and for all. Waiting for the results was pure torture. He felt like he was stuck in limbo, unable to move forward, unable to think about anything else. Meanwhile, the rumors had already started spreading. Social media was on fire. People were whispering, speculating, trying to piece together what was happening. Some were defending Chrissy, saying Jim was overreacting, that DNA tests weren't always accurate. Others, they weren't so forgiving. Chrissy being acting shady, one tweet read, if Jim's gut is telling him something's off, he needs to trust it. Y'all, imagine being in Jim Jones' shoes right now, finding out your kid might not be yours. Man, that's heartbreaking. The internet had turned his personal nightmare into public entertainment. And Chrissy, she was still calling, still texting, still begging him to talk. But Jim wasn't ready. Not until he had the truth. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, his phone rang. The lab. His heart pounded as he answered. Yeah. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Mr. Jones, we have your results. Jim held his breath. Silence. Then, we can confirm that you are not the biological father. The words hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. not the father. Everything went still. Everything blurred. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the voice still talking, explaining the details, the percentages, but it didn't matter. Jim had his answer, and now there was no going back. His hand shook as he ended the call. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at nothing, numb. Then his phone buzzed again. Another text. Unknown number. Told you. Now what's your next move? Jim exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He knew exactly what his next move was. This wasn't just about Chrissy anymore. This was about setting the record straight. For himself, for his future, for everything he had lost. And the world was about to find out the whole truth. Jim stared at his phone, his mind racing. The truth was out now, undeniable, irreversible. He wasn't the father. Everything he had believed, everything he had built with Chrissy had been a lie. And now the world was watching, waiting to see what he would do next. But the question was, what was Chrissy's next move? Would she fight back, try to spin the narrative, or would an even bigger secret come to light? One thing's for sure, this drama is far from over. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. What do you think Jim should do now? Should he expose Chrissy publicly or handle this behind closed doors? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want all the latest updates on this situation, make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications, because this story is only getting started.